I'm good. It's fine. I can see stuff.
There you go, mate.
All right, everyone.
Everyone can
So,
see in that
hello.
room.
Uh, my name is Somber, and I'm. This is day 2 of 5 of our Second Life ponycon writing workshop. And so, what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about stories and the process of writing. Everyone will have a chance to read their stuff and get some back. So. Hopefully I'll get through this pretty quick so we'll have lots of time for workshopping and we'll just go from here. So, Somber Talk Stories because 2020, yay. Why are you being difficult? Alright. So here's the first thing is, it helps if you actually kind of think about stories themselves a little bit before you really dive into writing them because stories are a very human characteristic. Um, we have yet to see anything in the natural animal kingdom that actually crafts together narratives. We've been telling stories, even possibly before we had language. The earliest stories are cave paintings that were recorded events, ages 30,000 years or so, of hunting bands going after animals. So really, when you are a writer, all you are doing is extending this tradition of essentially writing stuff down for the reading and examination of other people. So helps ask the question of what is a story, because I'm very surprised that a lot of folks are not 100% sure of this. They might say it's a novel, or they might say that it's a movie. Um, in reality, it's much simpler than that. In a nutshell, a story is a recounting of one or more events. And that's it. A story can be true, as in a history or a biography or an autobiography. Um, or it could be completely fictional, which is what we would call a narrative. And that fiction can be anything from a novel to a poem to a song, uh, movie, video game. Um, but it all boils down to events, to things happening. And I'm very frequently approached by people who say, "I have this character, and he's a half drow demigod who's wields this artifact sword, and he's really angsty because he's persecuted by his people, and da 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 da." And I then say, "Well, that sounds great. What's the story?" And they're like, "I don't know. What do you think?" Well, unfortunately, that's something that an amazing character does not give you. Something has to happen in a story, even if it's as simple as your super amazing, awesome character goes to the store for a thing of milk. Um, and depending on how you write that, it could be a really awesome story, or it could be a really boring story, but something actually has to happen with the to create. So the funny thing is that all a story needs is for something to happen. You can have a story that does not have a setting. It does not have a place. It can be a simple cube, or even nowhere at all, where you essentially have two individuals in a dialogue with each other, talking at each other, and the thing that happens is one of them changes their mind. Um, you can have a story that is characterless. Um, there's a short story called "And Gentle Rains Will Come," in which the character, as it were, there are no actual characters in the story. It's a house in a post-apocalyptic setting, and you actually see this house trying to go through its automatic, computerized routine. But there is no actual character to recount these events, and that's the point. So even though somewhere and someone is useful, the most important to to have for your story is to think of what is actually happening to make this story a story. And is it something that's important? Is it something that is meaningful? Is it something that is going to make people feel and care and maybe ask questions? Yeah, it's kind of funny that how little a story needs to be a story. So, original stories. I am very often asked or told, well, my story is original. No, it probably isn't. In reality, there are very few stories. For example, X gets Y is an event. It's a very simple event, but you could put in Somber gets marshmallows. Not sure how gripping or in depth that story would be, but it would be a story. And it would be as complex as you would like to elaborate on the process of Somber getting marshmallows. So when you are writing a story, do not worry about, is this an original story or does this feel like lots of other stories you've seen before? Because it probably does. Most stories just tend to fall into between 6 or 24 different forms. And it's not so much the originality of the story, but the way that you have your take on the story. So one example that a lot of people know because it was probably beaten into your head at middle school grade level is the coming of age story. And this is a story where you have a character who is generally regarded as immature, and they undergo the process of becoming a mature, responsible adult. Okay, that's a story, but there's a huge difference in how you execute that story. For example, Harry Potter is a coming of age story. The Lion King is a coming of age story. Every single Cutie Mark Crusader episode is a coming of age story, with the last one being probably the most blatant coming of age story. Spoiler alert, that's the one where the Cutie Mark Crusaders are momentarily aged up to full age, but their voices don't change. So just because this story isn't original in no way makes it bad. And a lot of people will say, well, I'm worried that this story is cliche, or I'm worried that this story is, using too many tropes and it's too familiar. The cliche is that it is a story in that where the reader kind of knows what is already going to happen in this story. They've seen it before, and they're anticipating that whatever is going to come in the story is not going to be worth their time. And that's essentially why a cliche is a problem. It's not bad writing so much as it's a red flag for a reader that maybe I shouldn't invest as much time in the story as I can. Now, you can use cliches and you can deconstruct cliches, because when you see the line, it was a dark and stormy night, you can follow that line up with, but I, as a vampire, was not setting foot when I have Netflix. And suddenly you take that expectation with that cliche, that dark and stormy night, and you show the reader, hey, I'm going to be playing with cliches in this story. Now the reader goes, huh, haven't seen that. Might be fun. I kind of have some ideas of where the story is going to go. So don't stress about an original story. Just stress about the way that you're going to be executing this story. Oh, come on. All right. So as I was saying, unique and distinct are the really important aspects of a story. Okay? Think about what it is in your story that sets it apart from other stories. And this is something I'd especially like to emphasize for people that write Fallout Equestria fiction. What is it about your story that would make it stand out? Like if you had to spend 5 minutes with someone and you just had to talk about your Fallout Equestria story or your story in general, what are the things that are the important parts to get across that make your story unique and special? Okay, and here's the most important thing, is that it has to be special to you. If you are writing a generic story to write a generic story, you're not really doing yourself any favors. But if you're writing a story that you like, that you care about, that's kind of the important place to be. With time, with practice, you can make a story that's more complex, that's more engaging, but it has to be somehow special. Otherwise, it's something that is going to become very easily forgettable to your reader. All right, so planners versus pantsers. And there are essentially two kinds of stories. There's a story where you sit down and you write your 40 pages of backstory along with your 9 pages of world building and your carefully charted out plot, your characters that have been developed down to their freckle size, and the stories that are not. Where essentially you just simply say, I am going to write a story where I turn into a dog and we see what happens next. Both are perfectly valid methods of writing a story. You can spend years planning a story and never writing a word. And you can spend years banging away at a story with absolutely no focus whatsoever and write millions of words that honestly are confusing and most people won't slog through. You have to pick a writing system that works for you. Stephen King is a world famous pantser. A lot of classic writers are planners, where Orson Welles was a very famous planner, where he would consider all of the possible nuances of a story. Tolkien created an entire language for his story and built around it. Whether you as a writer have to do that amount of planning is up to you. Some people enjoy the process of planning a story way more than writing a story. Others, they have an idea, it seems cool, let's go. And who knows if they will actually ever get to the end of their story. Stephen King essentially writes a story till he's bored and then finishes it. There's a kind of a third style that is made popular due to G.R.R. Martin. That's called the gardener, where essentially it's like halfway between the two, where it's like, I'm going to create a world, do some careful world building. I'm going to throw some characters in it, and I'm just going to write what happens. To me, that's just a fancy type of pantser. It's a pantser with big pants. But regardless, you just have to use a style that works for you. And if someone says, well, you're not planning your story out, yeah, I'm not. I'm just simply writing as it comes to me. If someone says, well, this seems really, really disorganized, it's like, yeah. Or if it seems like, oh, there's lots and lots of nuances and I don't understand, it's like, well, yeah, that's the way that I write a story. So don't worry about one over the other. All right, 15 minutes. Woohoo! Come on. Oh, come on. Next. All right, so this is something that I get asked all the time. Where to start my story? And the answer is there is no good answer. Kurt Vonnegut says start as close to the end as possible, because you want to not waste any of your reader's time. You want to get the story started, you want to get the story done, and you want the reader to move on. Lewis Carroll says start at the beginning, and when you reach the end, stop. Wherever that is where you end. Overall, the goal is to not waste the reader's time. So if you're writing something, you should be able to justify why is this necessary in the story. And if it's not necessary, if you just wrote it because it was an idea in your head, ask if you did at all. A lot of people like to accuse some of my writing as lots and lots of fluff. So I can usually go through it, pick out a point, and talk about why that's actually in the story, what I intended it to do for the story. Okay, so make sure that you can do that when you're throwing stuff in your story, because otherwise you're kind of wasting a lot of times. Your time and the reader's time. All right. So ordering a story, I probably should put it there. I cannot talk. I probably should have put in a slide that shows the famous, a rising action iceberg-like shape that you've seen in English class time and time again, where it starts with the background, then something happens, and it rises up, and you find in resolution. Well, this is classically how most stories are built up. The thing is that these stories don't actually have to be organized in this order. So it varies a lot depending on how you want to organize your story. So 1, 2, 3, 4 is a chronological order. It starts at the beginning and then it goes to the ending. The problem with the chronological order is that it can be very boring to start. You're essentially setting the stage, then leading to the inciting incident, and a reader will only background so long, where they're like, okay, when does the story start? And I've had some writers that I've workshopped with where they have gone chapters before the story ever starts, and it's like, why don't you have the story start? Make this your chapter 1, and then do the second idea, which is a 2, 1, 3, 4. You start with the inciting incident, and then you fill in the background as needed as the action rises to the climax. A 4, 1, 2, 3, that's a climax coming first, or sometimes even a resolution coming first. Good examples of this are like John Wick or The Usual Suspects, where something has happened and the story is essentially going through and figuring out what it is that got us to this point. Because it's a bit of a teaser, saying we see this guy and we have to wonder what the heck is going on. And then the story naturally grows out of there. And then you have a 3, 2, 1, 4, where the story is in media res. It's essentially a story that is already in progress. Things are happening, and it makes the reader ask questions. So then you explain to the reader, oh, here's the inciting incident that we're dealing with. Here's the background to make it all matter, and then actually lead. None of these are better than any other. It depends on the kind of story you want to write and the kind of writer that you are. I am a big fan of 1, 2, 3, 4. I like building characters and then having things happen. But I usually try to get to the end, that inciting incident as soon as I can. Yeah, maybe 2, 1, 3, 4 would be a better example. Someone just take a picture. Anyway.
Yeah, it's me. I'm just doing it for the Discord.
Okay, sorry. I'm like hearing things. I'm like, is that? Am I hearing things? Am I losing my mind? Okay, no time.
Honey, you lost your mind long ago.
Too true, too true. All right, here's a tip. My story is horrible. Yes. Yes, it most definitely probably is. All first drafts are bad. Your first draft, my first draft, Stephen King's first draft, George R.R. Martin's first draft, all first drafts are horrible. Because the idea is you are simply getting the story into some kind of physical form outside of your head so that you can do something with it. So don't be writing a story and go, oh, this is horrible, oh, this is terrible, oh, I hate this, oh, this is stupid. Okay, you need to mute that part of your brain that is saying that. And it's hard. I know. It's hard when your own brain is saying, hey, stop writing because this is no good. Yes, it is no good. The point is that stories that are bad can be made better. It just takes time and work. If you have the best story in the world and you are trying to get it perfect on your first try, you will probably never finish that story. And so it doesn't matter if it's perfect or not because no one will have the chance to read it. Right? So don't worry if your story is horrible. Bad things can be made better. It just takes work. Now, if you have a first draft and you put it out there and say, here's my story, and you haven't done any editing, any proofreading, it's a bad story. And probably should put a little more work into it. Just saying. Okay. Here's another one. I don't know what to write. This is very frequently called writer's block. The thing is that in writer's block, your brain is essentially telling you, hey, I'm being forced to work. I don't like it, so I'm going to dump this neurotransmitter called cortisol into your brain, and it's going to make you unhappy. It's going to make you anxious. It's going to make you feel like you're stressed and your boss is breathing down your neck. And that is a deliberate attempt to make your brain work harder. The problem is that your brain can stop the cortisol by not writing and going to play a game, go to talk to somebody, go to watch a YouTube video. And so what ends up happening is the writer's block becomes an excuse to not write. Do not let frustration stop you from writing, because there are a million things you can do that are not writing. Write something else. Get your brain trained like a muscle to jump to writing something else. It can be another part of the story. It can be a second story. It can be some background. It can be some character stuff. It can be your character walking down a street set in a streets don't exist. You want to basically force your brain to get into the habit of, when I'm dealing with this stress, come up with something creative, and that will make the stress stop. And it is possible. It just takes a lot of practice and work. All right. All right, so I finished my story, and now what? Edit, edit, edit. Pre-readers, editing, and then you finally submit it to wherever. This is actually going to be what I talk about on the last workshop when I talk about publishing. So we'll go into more detail then. So we have a little bit of time for questions, and then we'll go ahead and get people formed up into groups. Hopefully everyone will have their time to read, and things will be cool. So, let me look at the chat room and see who has questions. Yes, to quote Ernest Hemingway, the first draft of anything is shit. What is the person who writes like a pantser but goes through pruning and changing things? That would be what is typically called a gardener. That's that George R.R. Martin. Or it is a pantser that is not very fast. Generally, you want to finish the story and then go back, prune, and change things. Otherwise, you will never finish the story. You will just keep pruning and changing and pruning and changing. Finish the story, then prune and change if you can. Hyper. Okay, any other questions? I did that with Dark and Stormy. Oh, corruption. Why not make a simple outline first? Just map it out and see how it looks before diving in. All right, that is called. Yes, I did. You caught it. That's simply planning, and there's nothing wrong with an outline. You can take it out. You can say, okay, here's the story. Here are the main parts. Here's what kind of goes in between. One method of outlining is you start with like a half dozen major points, and then you put in points between them, and then you put in points between all of them as well, and then you keep putting points of the story between each other until you eventually have your entire story written out. It's called the snowflake planning method. If you're a planner, that's great. If you are a pantser, it's not going to do you much good, because essentially you're going to start throwing things in that don't match your outline. And very soon you might find yourself completely off the outline. So again, if outlines work for you, great, do it. If world building in detail, like you want to write out pages and pages of world building, helps you write your story, do it. But you don't want to be wasting your life planning a story that you never actually go and write. I mean, unless you enjoy world building for fun, which people do. How do I get across a character that has a horrifyingly thick accent while still having the character be readable? Oh Lord, this question. All right. So a reader has to be able to understand what is on the page, or a reader is going to be deliberately frustrated. You are taking a gamble either way. If you have the character be easily understood, but you simply say, and he said in his thick Scottish accent, you're essentially leaving it up to the reader to remember that they have a thick Scottish accent as they read the dialogue. If, however, you decide to put that dialogue into dialect and the reader cannot understand it, your reader is going to be very frustrated. It is a gamble either way. It's a question that as a reader you have to say, do I feel comfortable putting this risk on my reader, or do I just want it to play safe and have the story be told? So yeah, it's sucks to say, but it really depends on the kind of writer you are. I am someone that generally likes clarity, and I may give a small someone like because people who have seen the show, seen Applejack, will know, yeah, this is how this character works. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge. All right. Does having plot points you want to hit and then play the game connect the dots through writing counting as planning? Yeah, that's a form of planning. Basically, any outline or preview, summary of important parts, yeah, that's all good. It's useful to give you a place to write next so you don't get stuck. It gives you kind of an idea of overarching themes and narratives that you want to have in your story. So yeah, that's another form of planning. Again, as long as it helps you write the story, that's the critical thing that comes back, because there's many things you can do that are not writing. Gotta write. This is for myself as well as other people. The snowflake method used what? Are you asking, is the snowflake method used, or? No. I usually do nonfiction chronologically, but that's just me. Organizing nonfiction is a lot trickier depending on how you are presenting the information. A lot of biographies, autobiographies are a real art to write because of how you have to present that information. All right. Any other questions? Questions, comments, concerns?
Let me check the live stream.
Sure.
It looks like you're golden.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and